The stage rolled through red dust like a coffin on wheels, creaking toward the edge of nowhere. Asher Pike stood on his porch, chalk in hand, watching the cloud rise against the Colorado sky. Spring of 1872 had come dry as old bones. The board propped against his hip read, "Virgin Bride, clean start, no past." He'd written those words 6 months back to the matrimonial agency in St. Louis. Paid good money for them to find what he asked for: a young woman untouched by grief, unspoiled by the world's harsh hands. His throat ached where the bullet had torn through 5 years past. Not from pain anymore, just from the memory of sound. The last word he'd spoken had been Martha, his sister's name, called out in warning. Too late, the raiders had already taken her. The stage pulled up in a symphony of squeaking axles and snorting horses. Driver spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Dry Willow Ranch. Asher nodded, tucked the chalk in his pocket. His boots made hollow sounds on the porch boards as he stepped down. Had to look presentable for his bride. He'd washed, trimmed his beard, even beaten the dust from his best shirt, the blue one Martha had sewn. The driver climbed down, opened the stage door. "Lady for the Pike Ranch." Black fabric emerged first, black like crow feathers, like burnt prairie grass, like mourning. Asher's hand tightened on the porch post. Then came the woman herself, and his chest went cold as a February creek. She wasn't young. Lines mapped the corners of her eyes, carved by sun and sorrow. Her dress hung on her frame like she'd borrowed it from someone larger, someone who'd eaten regular meals. But it was her eyes that told him everything swollen red, glazed with the peculiar exhaustion that comes after tears run dry. A widow. They'd sent him a widow. "Ma'am." The driver helped her down. Set a single carpet bag in the dust. Small bag. Not much to show for a life lived. She stood there in the afternoon glare, swaying slightly like wheat in wind. "Mr. Pike." He nodded, jaw tight. The chalkboard hung useless at his side. What good were words when the world played such tricks? "I'm Mara Quinn." Her voice came out cracked, like she hadn't used it in days, maybe weeks. The driver climbed back up, eager to be gone. "That's my delivery done. You folks have a blessed union." He cracked the reins before the words finished leaving his mouth. The stage lurched away, dust devils dancing in its wake. They stood there, two strangers with a contract between them, while the sun hammered down like a blacksmith's fist. A hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp as glass. Asher lifted his board, wrote quick, angry strokes, "Not what I ordered." She read it, chin lifting just a fraction. "No, I suppose I'm not." He erased with his sleeve, wrote again, "Agency lied. They said you wouldn't mind, said you wouldn't talk much." Her fingers worried at her sleeve. "I paid them extra to overlook my circumstances." The chalk snapped in his grip. He pulled out another piece, wrote how many times. She understood. Women like her always understood such questions. Twice widowed, Samuel after 3 years, then William after 18 months. Her voice dropped to nothing on the last words. "William passed 6 weeks ago. Fever took him on the freight road to Denver." Asher turned away, studied his land. 40 acres of scrub and grass. Good water from Willow Creek. Small herd of cattle. 6 horses. He'd built it all for Martha, thinking she'd help him run it after their parents died. Now Martha lay under a cottonwood by the creek, and he had a twice-widowed woman on his doorstep. He could send her back. Next stage came through in a week. Could write to those liars in St. Louis, demand his money returned. Could stay alone with his chalk and his silence. Behind him, she made a small sound, not quite a sob, more like air leaving a punctured bellows. He turned to find her gripping the porch rail, knuckles white through worn kid gloves. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know I'm not. I know, but I had nowhere else. William's family, they said I was cursed, said I brought death to their men, said terrible things." Her eyes closed. I just needed somewhere quiet, somewhere people didn't know. The wind kicked up, sending her black skirts billowing. She looked like a scarecrow in a burned field. All angles and sorrow. Nothing like the fresh young bride he'd imagined teaching to milk cows, showing how to read the weather and cloud formations. Nothing like what he'd paid for. But the sun was getting low, and the next town was 20 miles of nothing. And something in her stance, the way she held herself upright despite the weight pulling at her shoulders, reminded him of Martha in those last minutes, refusing to cry in front of the men who'd come to hurt them. He wrote on his board, "Supper's beans and cornbread." She blinked, read it twice. "I can cook. I'm good at cooking. House needs work. I can work." He studied her, this woman the color of grief. Wrote one more thing, no promises. "I'm not asking for any—" She picked up her carpetbag with steady hands. "Just a roof and honest work." He turned toward the house, and after a moment, heard her boots follow on the packed earth. The door groaned on its hinges as he pushed it open. Inside, the main room sat sparse as a monk's cell table. 2 chairs, pot-belly stove, narrow stairs to the loft where he slept. Martha's room stood closed at the back, untouched these 5 years. "It's fine," Mara said, setting down her bag. "It's more than fine." He showed her the kitchen alcove, the water barrel, the wood box. Wrote on his board where things were kept, what time the rooster crowed, when the cattle needed checking. She nodded at each instruction, memorizing the rhythm of a life lived in careful routine. When dark fell full, he pointed to Martha's door, then wrote, "You can sleep there." Her hand hesitated on the latch. Was it whose room? He could have lied. Could have written storage or empty or nothing at all. Instead, his chalk moved honest across the slate. "My sister's." Mara's fingers traced the door frame, gentle as if touching something holy. "I'll take good care of it." He nodded once and climbed to the loft, boards creaking under his weight. Through the thin floor, he heard her moving below soft footsteps, the whisper of fabric, the careful click of the door closing, then silence, thick as wool. Asher lay on his narrow bed, staring at the rafters. Somewhere in the walls, mice scratched out their small lives. Wind worried at the shutters, and below him, a widow in black tried to sleep in a dead girl's bed, both of them refugees from the world's casual cruelties. Not what he'd ordered. Not by half. But the house felt different with another heartbeat in it. Fuller. Somehow. Like a jar that had sat empty so long you'd forgotten it could hold anything at all. He closed his eyes and, for the first time in years, didn't dream of Martha calling his name. Dawn came like a reluctant visitor, seeping gray through the shutters. Asher woke to unfamiliar sounds, water pouring, quiet footsteps, the scrape of iron on iron. He lay still, parsing this new language of another person in his house. When he descended the ladder, she stood at the stove, her black dress already dusted with flour. Coffee percolated, filling the room with bitter comfort. The table bore 2 plates, 2 cups, arranged with the careful precision of someone unsure of boundaries. She turned at his footfall, nodded once. No morning pleasantries. No forced cheer, just acknowledgement one early riser to another. He appreciated that. His chalkboard waited by his plate, wiped clean. He wrote, "Water from the barrel, coffee grounds in the tin." "Found them," she said, pouring coffee into his cup. Her hands steady now, steadier than yesterday. "Also found weevils in the flour, set it in the sun." He'd meant to do that weeks ago. Kept forgetting, the way a man alone forgets things that don't immediately threaten survival. He wrote cornbread. Biscuits. Had enough clean flour. She set the plate before him. Golden brown. Steam curling up like morning prayers. Bacon too. Hope that's acceptable. More than acceptable. He'd lived on burnt beans and stale bread so long he'd forgotten food could be more than fuel. The biscuit crumbled warm between his fingers, butter melting into every crevice. He ate slowly, watching her from under lowered brows. She ate like a bird, small bites, long pauses. Her gaze stayed fixed on her plate, but he could see her cataloging the kitchen, the cracked window pane, the loose board near the door, the soot-blackened wall behind the stove. He wrote, "Out to pasture, back by noon." "I'll be here," she said simply. The cattle waited by the fence, lowing complaints about the late hour. He worked among them, checking hooves, counting heads, mending a break in the fence line. The familiar rhythm of labor settled his bones, but part of his mind stayed in the house, wondering what she was doing, if she'd still be there when he returned. The kitchen gleamed like it hadn't in years. She'd scraped the soot, patched the window with paper and flour paste, even tackled the grease-caked shelves. Now she sat at the table, needle flashing as she mended what looked like curtains. "Found these in a trunk," she said without looking up. "Moths had been at them, but the fabric's still good." Martha's curtains, yellow flowers on white cotton, sewn the winter before she died. He'd stuffed them away, unable to bear the sight. Now here they were, resurrection in a widow's hands. He wrote, "Don't need prettying." Her needle paused. "Not prettying, just mending what's torn." She held up the fabric, showing neat darns where holes had been. "Waste not." Hard to argue with that. He went to wash up, came back to find dinner waiting beans that actually tasted like something, cornbread that didn't break teeth, even a dish of preserved peaches she'd discovered in the cellar. Days folded into a rhythm. He'd wake to coffee already brewing, find his work clothes cleaned and folded, come home to meals that reminded him eating could be pleasure. She never asked questions, never pushed for conversation beyond the necessary. His chalkboard became their telegraph line, brief messages about supplies needed, work to be done, weather coming in. She learned his habits quick, how he liked his coffee black as tar, that he checked the horses last thing before bed. When his chalk supply ran low, she had new pieces waiting, stolen from some limestone deposit she'd found near the creek. He learned hers too, how she hummed when she thought he couldn't hear not songs, just wordless melodies that seemed pulled from some deep place, that she couldn't pass the mending basket without picking up something to fix. How she stood at the window each sunset, still as a fence post, watching the light die over the plains. One evening, rain drumming the roof, he came in to find her at the table with his account ledger spread open. She looked up quick, guilty. "I apologize. I was dusting and it fell open, and I noticed—" She gestured at the columns of numbers, his cramped attempts at bookkeeping. "You're losing money on the cattle sales. The buyer in town, he's shorting you based on these figures." He frowned, wrote, "You read numbers." "Samuel kept books for a grain merchant, taught me." Her finger traced down a column. "See here, he's claiming more loss to transport than possible. 20% at most should cover it, but he's taking 35. Asher studied the numbers with new eyes. She was right. That snake Henderson had been skinning him for years, counting on his silence to mean ignorance. He wrote, "Fix it." "I could keep proper accounts." "If you'd trust me with it." Trust. Strange word between strangers. But she'd been in his house 2 weeks now, had access to everything worth stealing, and his cash box remained untouched. He nodded. That night she worked by lamplight, transforming his scattered papers into neat columns, clear calculations. He sat across from her, patching harness leather, stealing glances at her concentrated face. In the yellow light, with her guard down, he could see past the widow's weeds to the woman underneath, maybe 30, maybe younger, aged by grief but not broken by it. "There," she said finally, showing him the ledger. "This is what you're truly owed." The number made him blink. Henderson owed him near $200 in shorted payments, enough to buy winter feed, fix the barn roof, maybe even expand the herd. He wrote, "How do I collect?" "Take this to the bank manager, Mr. Fitzgerald." At his nod, she continued, "Show him the true numbers. He'll pressure Henderson." Bankers don't like being associated with cheats. Smart. He'd never thought to use the bank as leverage. Never had anyone to think of such things. She closed the ledger, hands smoothing the leather cover. William used to say I had a head for figures, said it wasn't seemly in a woman, but she shrugged. Seems useful enough now. He wanted to ask about William, about Samuel before him. Wanted to know how she'd ended up twice widowed before 30. What kind of men they'd been. Whether she'd loved them or simply survived them. But he had no voice for such questions, and his chalkboard felt too blunt for the asking. Instead, he wrote, "Thank you." She smiled then, just a small turn of lips, but it changed her whole face. For a moment, he could see who she might have been before life took its pound of flesh pretty in that understated way of prairie women, with strength built into the bones. "You're welcome," she said, and went to bank the fire for the night. He climbed to his loft, but couldn't settle. Through the floor, he heard her preparing for bed, the splash of water in the basin, the rustle of fabric, the soft click of Martha's door. Then silence, except for rain on the roof and wind in the eaves. 2 heartbeats in the house now, 2 sets of breath marking time in the darkness. It should have felt like invasion, this presence of another in his carefully ordered solitude. Instead, it felt like something else entirely. Like maybe a house could be more than shelter. Like maybe silence shared was different from silence endured alone. He turned over, pulling the blanket high, and listened to the rain until sleep finally came. She was folding quilts when the past came calling. Asher watched from the doorway as her hands stilled on the wedding ring pattern, fingers tracing the interlocked circles. The morning sun caught the side of her face, illuminating some private sorrow. "My grandmother's," she said without turning. Always knew when he was near, like she'd developed senses for silence. Carried it from Pennsylvania when I married Samuel. He entered the room, boots careful on the clean floor. Wrote on his board, "Good pattern." 84 pieces per block. Her voice stayed level, but her hands gripped the fabric tight. Samuel's mother counted them. Said any woman who couldn't piece a proper quilt couldn't keep a proper house. The quilt smelled of cedar and age. She folded it with the reverence due old things that had witnessed too much, set it in the chest. When she straightened, her eyes were dry but distant, seeing through the walls to some other place. "He wasn't a bad man, Samuel." The words came slow, like water through limestone. "Just young. We both were. 18 when we married. Thought we knew everything about the world." Asher settled on the trunk by the window, bored across his knees. Sometimes the best thing was to be furniture present, but undemanding. Had a temper, though, not mean-spirited, just quick, like summer lightning. She moved to the window, adjusting curtains that didn't need adjusting. Loved his horses more than anything. Spent every spare coin on bloodstock, dreaming of breeding champions. Her reflection in the glass looked ghostly, translucent. The stallion was called Tempest, 16 hands of black fury. Samuel was breaking him to saddle. Wouldn't hear of hiring it done. Said a man who couldn't handle his own horses wasn't much of a man. She paused. Outside, a meadowlark trilled its liquid song. I begged him to be careful. The horse had already injured 2 handlers, but Samuel laughed, said I worried like an old woman. Her hand pressed flat against the glass. I was hanging wash when I heard the commotion. Tempest had thrown him against the stable wall, kicked him twice before they could drive the horse off. Asher's chalk stayed silent. Some stories needed to run their course like water finding its level. He lived 3 days, long enough to apologize for leaving me with debts, long enough for his mother to blame me for not stopping him. She turned from the window. I was 19 and knew nothing about running a farm. Had to sell everything: horses, land, even grandmother's good china. Barely covered what was owed. She moved to dust the mantel, though no dust dared settle in her domain. Went back to my parents in Kansas, took in sewing, taught letters to children. 2 years of that before William came along. The cloth in her hands went still. He was different. Older 38 to my 21. Established, owned a freight company, ran goods between Kansas City and Denver. Said he needed a wife who could handle accounts while he traveled. Asher wrote you loved him. She considered this, head tilted. I was grateful to him. He was kind, patient, never raised his voice or his hand. Taught me bookkeeping, trusted me with the business side. A pause. Love seemed less important than safety. The honesty of it sat between them, stark as bones. We had a good year, profitable. He talked of expanding, maybe settling in Denver permanent. Then came that last run to Denver. Her voice dropped to barely above breath. Cholera hit the freight camp. Half the men were down with it before they knew what was happening. William tried to nurse them, keep the business running, wore himself to nothing doing it. She sank into the chair, suddenly looking every one of her hard years. His brother brought the body back. First thing he said was I'd cursed another good man. Word spread quick the widow Quinn. Twice unlucky. William's family wanted the business, said a woman had no right to it. I didn't fight. Took what little cash there was and bought that stage ticket west. The room held their breathing and nothing else. Then she laughed, bitter as chicory. The matrimonial agency nearly refused me, said men wanted fresh starts, not used goods. But I had enough for their fee, and they had your letter about. She gestured at his throat. Figured a man who couldn't complain might not mind damaged merchandise. Asher's chalk scratched harsh, not damaged. No, she met his eyes straight on. 2 husbands in the ground before 25, cast out by both families. No children to show for any of it. What would you call that if not damaged? He stood abrupt, crossed to her chair, wrote in large letters, surviving. She read it, blinked hard. That what we're doing here surviving? He thought about it, erased the board, wrote again, maybe more. The meadowlark called again, closer now. She rose, smoothed her skirts with hands that barely trembled. I should check the bread. But she paused at the door, not quite looking back. Samuel smelled of leather and horse sweat, would track mud everywhere. Never thought to wipe his boots. I was always cleaning up after him. A breath, held and released. William smelled of pipe tobacco and ink, careful about dirt, but left papers scattered like snow, always meaning to organize them tomorrow. She turned then, studying Asher with those eyes that had seen too much. You smell of cedar shavings and saddle soap. You wipe your boots and put your tools back proper. I appreciate that. Then she was gone, leaving him standing in the sun-struck room with chalk dust on his fingers and something shifting in his chest like ice breaking up in spring. He went to the window where she'd stood, could see the faint print of her palm on the glass. Through it, the world looked different, watery, uncertain, like viewing life through tears. 2 husbands, 2 griefs, 2 failures that weren't her doing, carrying all that weight alone, wearing black like armor against a world quick to judge a woman twice widowed. No wonder she'd come to his door looking like a scarecrow. No wonder she worked like the devil was chasing her, trying to prove her worth through gleaming floors and mended cloth. He understood something then about the careful distance she kept, the way she announced her presence before entering a room. She was protecting them both, him from expectations he couldn't meet, herself from hoping for anything beyond roof and bread. But understanding and accepting were different creatures. He wiped her handprint from the glass with his sleeve, watched it disappear like so many other marks people left on the world. Then he went to find her in the kitchen, where she was indeed checking bread, her face composed and calm, as if she hadn't just laid her whole sorry history bare. He wrote on his board, "Thank you for telling." She read it while testing the bread's crust, nodded once, figured you should know what kind of bargain you'd made. He erased, wrote again, "Good bargain." She looked at him then, really looked, like she was trying to read the truth of him through silence and chalk dust. Whatever she saw made her shoulders ease just a fraction. "Bread's done," she said, and pulled it golden from the oven, filling the kitchen with the smell of honest things, flour and heat, and the promise of sustenance. "There's butter in the crock." They ate together in comfortable quiet. Two souls who'd learned the hard way that words could wound as easy as heal. Outside, the meadowlark sang its heart out to the morning, and the sun climbed higher over the Colorado plains, indifferent to human sorrow, but warming them all the same. The morning he found her shawl caught on the fence post, wet with dew and torn by wind. Something shifted in Asher's chest. She'd been checking the chicken coop before dawn, likely lost it in the dark. Now it hung there like a broken wing, black wool fraying at the edges. He freed it careful, fingers working the snag loose. The fabric felt thin between his hands, worn soft by use. How many mornings had she wrapped this around her shoulders? How many times washed and mended until the original weave nearly disappeared? He could have left it on the porch, could have handed it back with a nod and gone about his day. Instead, he carried it inside, filled the wash basin, worked soap through the fibers gentle as handling a newborn calf. The water went gray with prairie dust. She was at the stove when he entered, rolling biscuit dough, glanced up, saw the shawl in his hands, went still. He hung it by the fire to dry, wrote on his board, "Fence caught it." "I wondered where—" Her voice trailed off, eyes fixed on the shawl dripping steady into the pan he'd set beneath. "You didn't need to trouble yourself." He shrugged, wrote "no trouble." But they both knew it was. Knew that washing a woman's shawl crossed some invisible line they'd drawn. He escaped to the barn, worked his hands raw, repairing harness leather, trying not to think about how careful she was with everything, how little she had. When he came in for noon meal, the shawl was gone. But that evening he saw her wearing it, the tear mended with stitches so fine they near disappeared. She didn't mention the washing, but her fingers touched the wool gentle-like when she thought he wasn't looking. Small kindnesses became their language. He noticed her squinting at her sewing, brought back spectacles from town, claimed he'd found them forgotten at the feed store, though they'd cost him dear at the mercantile. She took them with hands that trembled just once, polished the lenses careful, and suddenly her stitches grew even finer. She saw him favoring his left shoulder after wrestling a calf from mud. Wordlessly heated water for soaking. Left the basin steaming by his chair along with clean flannel. Disappeared to give him privacy. The heat worked into muscles he hadn't realized were knotted. And when she returned to clear the basin, he wrote simply, "better." He split extra kindling without being asked, stacked it close to the door so she wouldn't need to trek to the wood pile in her thin boots. Built a covered walkway between house and chicken coop after watching her struggle through mud one rain-soaked morning. Didn't say anything about it. Just built it while she was at market. Let her discover it herself. She found the gaps where wind whistled through his bedroom walls, chinked them with rags and flour paste while he worked the far pasture. Patched his work shirts with scraps that somehow matched, as if she'd saved pieces just in case. Left coffee warming on cold mornings, timed perfect for when he'd wake. One evening, checking the horses, Asher found her in the barn. She stood by the empty stall, the one that had been Martha's mare's fingers tracing the worn nameplate still nailed to the post, "Buttercup." He stopped sharp, board clutched tight. No one went in that stall. He'd left it exactly as it was 5 years back, Martha's brushes still hanging on their pegs, her saddle gathering dust in the corner. Mara turned, no guilt in her face. "She loved this horse." "Not a question." He nodded slow. "You can tell by how smooth the wood is here, where she must have petted her every day. And look," she pointed to scratches low on the wall. "Carved her initials. M.P. Martha Pike." He nodded again, throat tight even without speaking. "How old?" He wrote 16. Too young for what happened to her. Mara seemed to understand without more words. Stepped away from the stall, gentle-like. "The tack needs oiling. I could do it, if you don't mind. Shame to let good leather crack." He stood there struggling, wanting to say no, leave it be. Don't touch Martha's things. But also knowing Martha would hate waste, would fuss at him for letting good tack spoil. Finally wrote, "if you want." She didn't do it right away. Waited days, maybe testing if he'd change his mind. Then one afternoon he came back to find Martha's saddle cleaned and oiled, set back exactly where it had been, but gleaming now instead of dull with neglect. The brushes hung clean on their pegs. Even the nameplate had been polished until Buttercup shone clear. She never mentioned it. Neither did he. But something eased in his chest, seeing Martha's things cared for instead of becoming monuments to grief. The first time she got sick, just a cold, but it knocked her flat. He found himself lost. She tried to get up, make breakfast, but swayed on her feet like a newborn foal. He pressed her back with one firm hand, wrote, "Rest. The washing will wait. But supper, I survived before." She sank back, too weary to argue more. He built up the fire in her room, brought water, found a bottle of tonic in her things, managed soup from leftovers that wasn't half bad, though she only took a few sips. That night he sat outside her door, listening to her cough. Each harsh sound scraped at him. He'd failed Martha, failed to protect her when she needed him most. Now here was another woman under his roof, depending on him, and he couldn't even ease a simple cough. Come morning, she was better. Insisted on getting up despite his protests. Found her at the stove, pale but determined, making Johnny cakes. He wrote fierce on his board, too soon. "I'm fine." "Stubborn." She almost smiled. "Pot calling kettle." Maybe so, but he watched her close that day, made her sit more than usual, took on the heavier chores without asking. She allowed it, which told him she felt worse than she let on. That evening, checking his snares by the creek, he found wild honey in a dead oak. Risky work getting it. Bees angry at the theft, but he managed to fill a small jar. Back home, he mixed it with hot water and whiskey, set it by her chair. She sipped it slow, eyes closing at the sweetness. "My mother made something similar." He wrote, "Mine too." They sat in companionable silence while she drank, the fire popping soft, her color already better from the warmth and honey. When she finished, she held the empty cup between her palms like it was precious. "Thank you," she said, and he knew she meant for more than the drink. He took the cup, rinsed it, set it to dry. When he turned back, she was watching him with those eyes that saw too much, understood too well. Something passed between them in that look, acknowledgement of all the small kindnesses building up like stones into something neither had quite planned. He wrote on his board, "Welcome," but they both knew that word had grown too small for whatever this was becoming. She rose, steadier now, touched his shoulder light as a bird landing. Just a moment, just her fingertips through his shirt, but it burned warm long after she'd gone to her room. He sat by the dying fire, thinking about fence posts and shawls, spectacles and saddle oil, honey and careful hands, how two damaged people might build something good from scattered pieces, like quilting scraps into something whole. Outside, wind rattled the windows he'd reinforced just last week, testing his handiwork, but inside stayed warm and dry, filled with the smell of wood smoke and the memory of her fingers on his shoulder, brief as summer lightning, but twice as bright. The town of Dry Willow squatted 20 miles east like a scab on the prairie. Mara stood before the cracked mirror, pinning her hair careful, trying to armor herself in neatness. Market day. No avoiding it, they needed flour, salt, coffee, things the ranch couldn't provide. Asher appeared in the doorway, board in hand. "I'll go." "Need fabric for shirts. You can't pick fabric." He frowned, wrote, "Don't like you going alone." I've faced worse than gossiping townfolk, but her hands trembled on the last pin. He disappeared, came back with money from the cash box, counted it twice into her palm, then added extra, wrote, "For yourself." "We don't have spare." He was already heading out. Conversation closed. She tucked the money deep in her pocket, gathered the empty flour sacks and egg basket. The wagon waited, old Buck patient in the traces. The ride stretched long under a flat sky. Each mile closer to town pulled her shoulders tighter, made her check and recheck her appearance. Black dress brushed clean, boots mended, worn gloves hiding the calluses that marked her as working woman. Respectable, invisible, safe. Dry Willow's Main Street stretched 2 blocks of false front buildings pretending at grandeur. The general store squatted in the middle. Hampton's Dry Goods painted in fading letters. She tied Buck careful, took a breath that didn't quite fill her lungs, and stepped down. The bell jangled sharp as judgment. Mrs. Hampton looked up from her ledger, face shifting from welcome to wariness in a blink. Mrs. Quinn, isn't it? Yes, ma'am. Mara kept her voice steady. Pleasant. Need supplies for the Pike Ranch. Of course. But Mrs. Hampton's eyes had already started their inventory, the mended gloves, the worn boots, the black dress that marked her as either mourning or cursed. Maybe both. Mara moved through the store methodical, gathering necessities. Salt pork, coffee, flour, thread for mending, buttons for Asher's shirts. She lingered over the fabric, touching a soft blue chambray that would work up nice. That's dear fabric. Mrs. Hampton hovered close, protective of her wares. I have money. I'm sure just Mr. Pike usually buys the rough cloth, denim and such. His shirts need replacing. Mara pulled out the bolt firm-like, added it to her pile. 3 yards. The bell jangled again. Mrs. Carver from the boarding house. Mrs. Dean the banker's wife. They stopped mid-conversation, took in Mara at the counter. She felt their eyes like fingers, plucking at her composure. Why, you must be Mr. Pike's new... Mrs. Carver paused delicate. Housekeeper. Wife. The word came out harder than intended. Of course. We heard he'd sent for a bride. Mrs. Dean's smile could have curdled milk. From Kansas. Wasn't it by way of elsewhere? They knew. Somehow, they always knew. 2 dead husbands made for rich gossip fodder. Traveled faster than any stage. 2 yards of the white muslin, too. Mara kept her eyes on Mrs. Hampton, who was cutting fabric with unusual slowness. Brave of you, Mrs. Carver murmured, taking on a damaged man, though I suppose when options are limited. The scissors paused. Everyone waited to see if she'd rise to the bait. Mr. Pike is a good man. Mara counted out coins precise, each clink loud in the silence. Kind and steady. Still, it must be quiet, him not able to talk and all. Mrs. Dean edged closer, scenting blood. However do you communicate? We manage. I imagine you're used to managing after your experiences. The word dripped implications. Poor Mr. Pike. First that sister of his, now taking on a woman with such unfortunate history. Mara's hand slipped. Coins scattered across the floor, rolling every direction. She dropped to her knees, chasing pennies under shelves while her face burned. The women stood above, their skirts a wall of judgment. Let me help. A new voice, younger. Mara looked up to find a girl, maybe 17, kneeling beside her. Together they gathered the scattered money. Thank you, Mara whispered. I'm Lucy Morrison. My PA owns the livery. The girl pressed a escaped penny into Mara's palm, held on a moment. Don't mind them. They got nothing better to do than flap their gums. But the damage was done. Mara's hands shook as she finished paying, fumbled with the wrapped packages. The women had moved to the yard goods, whispering behind their hands. But their words carried clear. Black Widow. They're calling her 2 husbands in the ground. Know what she did to deserve? Poor Mr. Pike probably doesn't know. The flour sack tore as she lifted it. White powder exploded across her black dress. The floor, the counter. Mrs. Hampton's mouth went tight as a miser's purse. I'll pay for... Just go. Not cruel, but tired. I'll add it to the account. Mara fled, packages clutched tight, white flour marking her path like shame made visible. Made it to the wagon, threw everything in graceless. Her breath came short and sharp. Ma'am, Lucy Morrison had followed. You forgot this. She held out a small paper bag. I didn't buy. Whorehound drops. My treat. The girl glanced back at the store. They treated Martha Pike the same. You know, before what happened, said she was too wild, needed a husband to settle her, picked at everything she did. Mara took the bag, throat tight. Thank you. Pa says Mr. Pike's lucky to have help out there. Ranch that size needs 2 people minimum. Lucy stepped back. You come by the livery next time. I'll go to Hampton's with you. Safety in numbers. The kindness nearly broke her. Mara managed a nod, climbed onto the wagon seat, took up the reins with hands that wouldn't quite steady. The ride home stretched twice as long. Each bump sent flour puffing from her dress. In the back, the torn sack leaked steady, leaving a white trail on the wagon bed. $20 worth of supplies, and she'd made a spectacle of herself. Confirmed every gossip's worst assumptions. The ranch appeared like salvation. Asher stood by the corral, clearly watching for her return. Took one look at her flour-covered state and strode over quick. His board already out, trouble. She tried to speak, found her throat closed up tight, shook her head, climbed down clumsy. He caught her elbow when she stumbled, steadied her. Bad, he wrote. This time she nodded. He took in the torn sack, the white powder coating her like accusation. His jaw went tight. Started unloading the wagon, movements sharp with suppressed anger. She escaped inside, went straight to her room, peeled off the ruined dress, scrubbed at her face where tears had made flour paste. Through the window, she watched him tend Buck, every line of his body radiating fury. When she finally emerged in a clean dress, he was at the table, had her packages unwrapped, the blue chambray spread out, his board positioned where she could see good fabric. Too dear, I should take it back. He underlined it good twice, then wrote, for me. She nodded, miserable. Your shirts are wearing through. Then I need it. Simple as that. He folded the fabric careful, set it aside. Coffee? I can make... He was already at the stove, movements saying clearer than words. Sit, rest, let me... The coffee came out strong enough to float horseshoes, but she drank it grateful. He sat across from her, board between them. Names, he wrote. Doesn't matter. He underlined it. Carver, Dean, the usual. She stared into the black coffee. They called me the Black Widow. His hand tightened on the chalk, knuckles white. Wrote, I'll go next time. No. The word came fierce. I won't hide. That's what they want. He studied her. This woman who'd faced down gossips with flour in her hair and chin high, wrote slow, proud of you. The tears came then. Silent but steady. He didn't move, didn't try to comfort. Just let her cry it out while the coffee cooled between them. When she finally stopped, wiped her face with her sleeve. He pushed his handkerchief across the table. Lucy Morrison was kind, she said, from the livery. He nodded, wrote, Good people Morrisons. She said they treated Martha the same. His face went still. Then, yes. They sat with that truth between them. The weight of how cruel small towns could be to women who didn't fit their narrow molds. Outside, wind kicked up dust devils in the yard, and the torn flour sack flapped like a flag of surrender. But Mara Quinn had survived 2 husbands and their family's rejection. She'd survived Dry Willow's gossips too. I'll start your shirt tomorrow, she said, and Asher nodded like it was any other day, like she hadn't come home covered in flour and shame. That night he left something on her doorstep, a handful of wild sunflowers, roots still attached, ready for planting. She set them in water, thinking about kindness in the face of cruelty, about men who spoke with flowers when words failed. Tomorrow she'd plant them by the porch, where she could see them from the kitchen window, something bright and defiant, growing despite the drought and dust, like hope, stubborn and wild, taking root where it shouldn't flourish. The storm built all day like rage gathering. Clouds piled black on the western horizon, and the air went thick as wool. Cattle bunched nervous in the far pasture. Horses paced their stalls, ears flat, nostrils flaring at each gust. Asher worked fast, driving the cattle closer to shelter. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour. When the first lightning cracked, he was still half a mile from the barn, pushing stragglers through the gate. Mara watched from the porch, dish towel twisted in her hands. She'd seen storms in Kansas, but this was different, meaner, carrying the kind of electricity that made hair stand on end and teeth ache. Thunder rolled across the plains like artillery. Then the rain hit, not gradual but all at once, a gray wall of water that turned the world to mud. Asher disappeared into it, just a shadow fighting wind. She ran for the barn, skirts hiked up, rain driving needles through her clothes. The horses were wild-eyed, kicking their stalls. Buttercup's old stall stood empty, but the others held 5 horses going mad with storm fear. Asher burst through the doors, soaked through, pointed at the horses, and then outside they needed to move them to the lean-to before they hurt themselves. But how his hands were full trying to hold the doors against the wind. Lightning struck close, blue-white, and in that instant of brilliance she saw his face clear the frustration of a mute man trying to calm panicked animals. He couldn't whistle, couldn't call, couldn't croon the way horsemen did. The big bay mare reared, hooves striking wood. Another minute and she'd break her legs or skull. The storm was inside now. Wind screaming through gaps, rain horizontal. Mara didn't think, just opened her mouth and sang. Not planned, not conscious choice. The hymn rose from some deep place, the one her mother had sung during prairie storms when Mara was small. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. Her voice cracked at first, rough from disuse. She hadn't sung since William's burial, had sworn she never would again. But the horses turned toward the sound, ears swiveling. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul. Stronger now, finding the notes like old friends, the bay mare dropped to all fours, still trembling but listening. Asher stood frozen, rain streaming down his face. She moved to the first stall, still singing, running her hands along the horse's neck. The animal shuddered but didn't pull away. Behind her, she heard Asher moving, using her voice as cover to slip halters on, lead them out one by one. Sometimes I feel discouraged and think my work's in vain. Thunder crashed overhead, but the horses followed her voice like a rope in the darkness. She backed toward the doors, keeping the melody steady while Asher guided them through. The rain hit like fists, but she kept singing, wordless now when the verses ran out. Just the melody over and over. They got the horses into the lean-to, heads turned away from the wind, but the cattle in the near pasture were scattering, terrified, without dogs, without help. Asher couldn't hold them. She splashed after him, found him trying to turn the led steer. The animal's eyes rolled white. Lightning struck the old cottonwood by the creek, splitting it down the middle with a sound like the world breaking. Mara sang louder. Different now, not hymns, but an old cattle song William's drivers had used. Oh, slow up, dogies. Quit your roving around. The steer's head swung toward her. She kept coming, voice steady despite the wind trying to steal it. You have wandered and trampled all over the ground. Asher worked the edges while she held the center with her voice. And somehow they turned them, got them moving toward shelter. The rain was ice now, mixed with hail that struck like stones. She couldn't feel her feet, could barely see, but she sang on. Oh, graze along, doggies, and feed kinda slow. The barn loomed through the gray, They pushed the cattle inside, Asher fighting to close the doors against the wind. Mara's voice gave out, just stopped like a snapped string. She stood in the sudden quiet of the barn, rain drumming the roof, and realized she was crying. Not sad tears, something else, like a dam had broken inside her. 5 years of silence pouring out with the songs. Her knees went loose. Asher caught her before she fell. His arms came around her, solid and sure, and she let herself be held while the storm raged outside. He was soaked through, cold as creek water, but his hands were warm on her back. She felt him shaking, thought it was cold until she pulled back, saw his face. He was crying too, silent tears mixing with rain. This man who'd lost his voice to violence, who'd lived in enforced silence for years, undone by hearing another human voice raised in song to save what he couldn't save alone. His hand came up, traced the air like he was trying to catch the melody. His mouth moved, shaping words that wouldn't come. She caught his hand, pressed it to her throat where the songs had lived. "Still there," she whispered, "just hiding." He pulled her close again, and they stood in the barn, surrounded by the animals they'd saved, while outside the storm spent its fury on empty fields. The horses nickered soft, the cattle settled, sides steaming, and in Asher's arms. Mara felt something she'd thought lost forever, the simple grace of being useful, of having gifts that mattered. When the storm finally passed, they were different. Not fixed, she didn't believe in lightning strike healing, but cracked open somehow. The silence between them had a new quality, like a bell that had been rung and was still vibrating just below hearing. They tended the animals together, checking for injuries. Found the horses sound, the cattle mostly whole save for some hail welts. The cottonwood by the creek smoldered despite the rain, split heart exposed. Back at the house, Asher built up the fire while she made coffee with shaking hands. He disappeared upstairs, came back with a blanket that he wrapped around her shoulders, set a cup in her hands, then pulled out his board and wrote careful. Beautiful. She knew he meant the singing, but couldn't accept the compliment. Desperate. He shook his head, underlined the word, then added, Martha loved hymns. The name hung between them like a bridge. Mara sipped the scalding coffee, felt it burn down her throat where the songs had torn through. I hadn't sung since William died. Swore I wouldn't. He waited, patient as always. Seemed like tempting fate. Both husbands loved my singing. Both died anyway. She pulled the blanket tighter. Like my voice was cursed too. He wrote fierce and fast, saved us tonight, horses, cattle, me. That last word, underlined twice. She looked at him then, really looked. Saw past the scar on his throat to the man underneath, lonely, grieving, but stubbornly alive. Building a life board by board in this harsh place? Your voice, she said soft. Do you miss it? He considered, then wrote, Miss being understood easy. Don't miss the noise. She almost smiled. I understand you fine. Yes, he met her eyes straight on. You do. They sat while the fire crackled and their clothes steamed dry. Outside, the storm grumbled away eastward, leaving the world washed and strange. The split cottonwood would need cutting before it fell. The roof would need checking. Tomorrow would bring a dozen tasks. But tonight they sat in comfortable silence. Two people who'd weathered a storm and found unexpected grace. Her throat ached from singing. His hands were blistered from fighting rope and wind. Both damages honestly earned, saving what they'd built together. When she finally rose to find dry clothes, he caught her sleeve, pointed to his throat, then to her, then wrote one word, matches. She understood. Two damaged voices, one stolen by violence, one silenced by grief. But together, somehow, they made something whole. Not perfect, not healed, but enough. Yes, she said, and climbed the stairs to Martha's room that was becoming hers, humming soft under her breath. Below, she heard him banking the fire, checking the locks, settling the house for night. Tomorrow she'd wake hoarse as a crow. Tomorrow the gossips in town would still whisper "Black Widow" when she passed. Tomorrow the world would still be hard and unforgiving. But tonight she'd sung again. Tonight they'd saved what mattered. Tonight was enough. The last rumble of thunder faded toward Kansas, and Dry Willow Ranch settled into sleep, while overhead the stars came out clean and sharp, like promises written in a language only the heart could read. The supper dishes sat between them like an ordinary evening. Beans and cornbread. Nothing special. But Mara had added wild onions found by the creek, and the coffee was fresh. They ate in their usual quiet, but something had shifted since the storm. The silence felt fuller, weighted with words neither knew how to speak. Asher cleared his plate, pushed back from the table, wrote on his board, "Check the horses," and headed for the door. Routine, predictable, safe. Mara washed dishes slow, hands mechanical in the soapy water. Through the window, she watched lantern light bob toward the barn. The split cottonwood stood stark against the evening sky, reminder of how quick things could change. She dried the last plate, hung the cloth precise on its hook. The house felt too quiet, too empty, like it was waiting for something. She found herself at the door, shawl pulled tight. The night air still held that fresh-washed smell from the storm. Her feet knew the path to the barn without thinking. But Asher wasn't with the horses. The lantern sat abandoned on a post, casting shadows through empty stalls. She followed instinct and fading boot prints to the small hayloft, where a second light flickered. He sat with his back to her, shoulders shaking, not violent, just steady tremors like a man fighting to hold something in, or let something out. In 5 months of shared silence, she'd never seen him anything but controlled. She should leave, give him privacy for whatever battle he was fighting. Instead, she climbed the ladder, skirts catching on rough wood. The hay whispered under her weight. He didn't turn, but his shoulders stilled. She could see what had undone him, Martha's old saddle blanket spread across his knees, still bearing the pattern of horses she'd embroidered one winter. He must have kept it hidden up here, away from daily sight. Mara settled beside him, not touching, just present. The lantern light made everything golden and soft. Outside, an owl called, hollow through the darkness. "I couldn't save her," the words came out broken, forced through the damaged throat he never used. Each one cost him. She could see it in the way his hands clenched the blanket. She didn't speak, didn't want to interrupt whatever had finally broken loose. "Tried to warn, too late." His hand went to his throat, fingers tracing the scar. "They made me watch." The horror of it sat between them, heavy as stones. Martha at 16, bright and fierce. The brother who'd failed to protect her, who'd lost his voice crying her name. Tears ran silent down his face. 5 years of grief finally finding release. Mara reached out careful, like approaching a wounded animal. Her fingers barely brushed his shoulder, asking permission. He turned into her touch like a man drowning. She gathered him against her. This strong man made small by sorrow, and held on while he shook apart. His tears soaked through her dress. Her own eyes burned, remembering other griefs, other losses that couldn't be prevented. When the storm passed, he pulled back, embarrassed. Reached for his board, but she caught his wrist, held it gentle. "Don't," she said. "You don't need to explain." He studied her face in the lamplight. Then, careful as handling glass, he spoke again. "You sang." "Yes, like Martha would have." The comparison hung between them, precious and painful. She thought of the girl who'd carved her initials in the stall, who'd embroidered horses with patient hands, who'd died too young and too hard. "Tell me about her," Mara said. "Not the end, the rest." He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, halting, stubborn, like mule. She waited, patient as he'd always been with her. Laughed, At everything, even my jokes. His mouth curved, remembering. Terrible. Cook, burned. Water. But good with horses. He nodded. Best hands ever saw. The words came easier now, like a gate opening. Wanted to breed. Racers. Said we'd be rich. They sat in the hay-scented darkness while he painted Martha back to life with broken words. The girl who'd put frogs in his boots, who'd read Shakespeare to the chickens, who'd insisted on learning to shoot despite his protests, who'd been brave until the end. Should have sent her away somewhere safe. Where? Mara asked gentle. Where's safe for women alone? He went still, understanding the truth of it. She'd been twice widowed, cast out, reduced to mail-order marriage to strangers. He'd lost his sister to raiders. Safety was an illusion, fragile as morning frost. I'm sorry, she said, for Martha, for your voice, for all of it. He reached for the board, gave up, forced out, not your fault. Not yours either. They looked at each other then, really looked. Two people carrying guilt for things beyond their control. She saw him understand what she'd been trying to tell him, that some things just happened, cruel and senseless, and surviving them wasn't betrayal. He set aside the saddle blanket, pulled out his knife, started carving something in the beam beside them. Quick, sure strokes in the wood. She watched the letters form, You deserve peace. So do you, she whispered. He kept carving, If I can't speak, you'll sing. The promise of it made her throat tight. Not replacement, not forgetting. Just two broken people finding ways to fill each other's silence. Yes, she said. When you need words, I'll sing them. He set down the knife, took her hand careful in both of his. Work-rough calluses. Gentle grip. Drew letters on her palm with one finger, Home. She closed her fingers around the invisible word, held it tight. Home, she agreed. They climbed down from the loft together, her hand steady on the ladder rungs. He banked the lantern, checked the horses one more time. She waited by the door, watching him move through his evening ritual, understanding now why he came here every night. Not just for the animals, for the memories, for the sister who'd loved horses and Shakespeare and burning water. Walking back to the house, the split cottonwood loomed against stars sharp as glass. Tomorrow they'd have to cut it down, clear the danger. But tonight it stood like a monument to survival, damaged but upright. Roots deep enough to hold. At the porch, he stopped, pointed to the wild sunflowers she'd planted, now closed for night. Then to her, then to himself. She understood wild things transplanted, finding ways to bloom despite the odds. Inside, she made tea while he built up the fire. They sat at the table, cups between them, comfortable in shared quiet. When she rose to find her bed, he caught her sleeve. Thank you. The words came hoarse but clear. She touched his face, brief as blessing. Thank you too. In her room, Martha's room, but hers now, she sat on the bed and felt the house settle around them. Two heartbeats under one roof. Two voices, damaged different ways but learning to speak together. Not the life she'd planned, not the fresh start he'd ordered. Something better, something real. She lay down fully dressed, too tired to change, and listened to him moving overhead, the creak of his bed, then stillness. Through the window, stars wheeled slow overhead, and she thought about carved promises and held hands, and the way grief shared weighed half as much. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The cut tree, the mended fences, the trip to town where whispers waited. But tonight she'd held a good man while he grieved his sister. Tonight he'd promised she'd never have to be silent. Tonight they'd begun to build something neither had dared hope for. Home. The word echoed in her palm where he'd traced it. Home, with all its complicated meanings. Not perfect, not healed, but shelter enough for two storm-damaged souls learning to trust the quiet between words. She closed her eyes and, for the first time in years, felt peace settle over her like a well-worn quilt. Upstairs, she heard him turn over, bed ropes creaking, then silence, but the kind that held comfort instead of loneliness. Tomorrow she'd sing while they worked. Tomorrow he'd write new words on his board. Tomorrow they'd continue building this strange, necessary partnership. But tonight, they'd spoken truths in a hayloft, and that was enough. The owl called again, distant now. Wind rustled the sunflowers, and Dry Willow Ranch held its 2 residents safe through the dark hours, while somewhere in the walls, mice scratched out their small lives. And the world turned toward another dawn. The dust cloud rose from the east road like a bad omen. Asher spotted it first from the barn roof where he was patching shingles. 3 riders, maybe 4, moving with purpose toward the ranch. He climbed down quick, found Mara hanging wash. She read his face before he could write anything. "Trouble!" He pointed east, held up 3 fingers, her hand stilled on the wet sheet. They both knew unexpected visitors rarely brought good news to isolated ranches. "I'll make coffee," she said, but he caught her arm, shook his head. Something felt wrong about this. The way they rode, spread out like they were hunting something. The riders materialized from the dust 4 men, trail-worn and hard-faced. The lead rider sat his horse like he owned the ground beneath it, well-dressed despite the dust, gold watch chain glinting. Behind him, 2 others flanked a 4th man who kept his hand casual near his holster. "This the Pike place." The leader didn't dismount, didn't offer courtesy. Asher nodded, board ready but not yet raised. Mara had come to stand beside him, wiping her hands slow on her apron. "I'm Samuel Crane." The name hit like cold water. "From Lawrence. I believe you're harboring my brother's widow." Mara went rigid beside him. Asher felt rather than saw her fear the small step backward, the way her breathing changed. He moved slightly, putting himself between her and the riders. "There you are. Mara!" Crane's voice carried false warmth. "We've been looking for you. Very inconsiderate. Running off without a word." "I left word." Her voice came steady but quiet. "And payment for William's burial." "Ah, yes, the burial you arranged without family consent, without proper ceremony." Crane finally dismounted, passed his reins to one of his men. "We need to discuss certain matters, financial matters." Asher wrote quick on his board, showed it to Crane. "State your business." Crane barely glanced at it. "My business is with Mrs. Crane, or rather, Mrs. Quinn, as she's calling herself again." He pulled papers from his coat. "William died intestate, as his next of kin. Certain properties revert to the family." "He had no property left." Mara's hands clenched in her apron. "The freight business failed. Everything went to pay debts." "Not everything." Crane smiled thin. "There was a life insurance policy, small but significant, payable to his wife." He let that sink in. "You failed to mention it when you disappeared." Asher felt Mara sway slightly. He wrote, "How much?" $800. Crane's eyes never left Mara. "Enough to make the trip worthwhile, especially since there are questions about the circumstances of my brother's death." The hired gun, Asher could spot the type shifted in his saddle. The message was clear as spoken words. "He died of cholera," Mara said. "Half the freight camp saw it. The doctor signed papers." Doctors can be mistaken or influenced. Crane stepped closer. "First husband kicked by a horse. Second dead of sudden illness. Some might call that a pattern." Asher's chalk snapped in his grip. He pulled another piece. Wrote large, "Get off my land." Crane finally looked at him proper. "Ah, the famous mute rancher. Tell me, Mr. Pike, did she mention her history when she arrived, or did she play the grieving widow, let you think you were saving her?" The other men had dismounted now, spreading out casual-like. The hired gun kept his hand near his pistol, eyes tracking exits. Asher counted odds. Didn't like them. His rifle was in the house, pistol in the barn. All he had was the hammer from roof work. I have legal documents. Crane continued. A judge in Lawrence who'll swear out a warrant if needed. Suspicion of murder, theft of family property. He smiled wider. Unless we can come to an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Mara's voice had gone flat. Sign over the insurance payment. Return to Lawrence to properly answer questions about William's death. Clear your name through appropriate channels. Crane's tone suggested those channels would be neither appropriate nor clearing. Asher wrote, "She's my wife now." A mail order arrangement, hardly legal without proper documentation. Crane pulled another paper, which I doubt exists, given the circumstances. They'd been caught. No ceremony, no papers, just an agreement between damaged souls. In the eyes of law, she was still Widow Crane, subject to her dead husband's family's claims. "I'll need a day," Mara said, "to gather my things." "You'll come now." The hired gun spoke for the first time, voice flat as hammer on steel. "Mister, Crane's been patient enough." Asher moved then, stepping full in front of Mara. The hammer hung loose in his hand, but his stance said everything. The hired gun's eyes narrowed, hand twitching toward his holster. "Pike." Crane sounded amused. "You'd die for a woman you've known. What, a few months? Who lied about her past, brought danger to your door." Asher raised his board, wrote one word, "Yes." The tableau held 4 armed men. One mute rancher with a hammer, and a woman who'd run out of places to run. The morning sun beat down merciless. Somewhere a crow called, harsh and mocking. Then hoofbeats on the road. Everyone turned to see a buggy approaching, moving fast. Judge Morrison from town, with his daughter Lucy driving, the same girl who'd been kind to Mara at the store. "Morning, folks." The judge called out cheerful, but his eyes were taking in the scene sharp. "Heard there were strangers out this way. Thought I'd pay a social call." Crane's jaw tightened. A local judge was the last thing he'd wanted. "Just conducting private business." On Mr. Pike's land. Morrison climbed down from the buggy. Lucy close behind. "Gentlemen, I don't believe we've been introduced. Judge Harold Morrison, Circuit Court." The shift in power was subtle but real. Crane might have pulled in Lawrence, but out here, Morrison was the law. And from the way Lucy moved to stand near Mara, the Morrisons had come prepared to intervene. "Samuel Crane, I'm here to collect my sister-in-law. She has property belonging to my family." "Does she now?" Morrison pulled out his own papers. "Because I have here a marriage certificate, dated last week, between Asher Pike and Mara Quinn, properly witnessed and filed." Asher blinked. They'd never... But Lucy caught his eye, nodded slightly. The girl must have drawn up papers after seeing Mara's distress in town. Got her father to backdate them. Not strictly legal, but good enough to muddy waters. "That's impossible," Crane sputtered. "She couldn't remarry so soon." "No law about mourning periods in Colorado territory," Morrison said mild. "And any property Mrs. Pike brought to the marriage is now her husband's to protect." The hired gun had gone still, calculating new odds. A circuit judge as witness changed everything. Crane saw it too, face flushing dark. "This isn't over," he told Mara. "That money belongs to William's family. You know it does." "The money went to doctors," Mara said quiet. "Every penny, trying to save him. There's nothing left." Lie or truth? Asher couldn't tell. Didn't matter. He wrote on his board, showed it to Morrison. "These men are trespassing." "Indeed they are." Morrison's friendly mask slipped, showing steel underneath. "Gentlemen, I suggest you water your horses in town and consider your options. The stage east leaves tomorrow." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. The hired gun's fingers drummed his holster. Crane's men shifted restless. Then Crane laughed, bitter as alkali water. "Playing noble, Pike. She'll be your ruin too. Woman like that carries death like perfume. He mounted his horse, looked down at Mara. When he's in the ground, don't come crying to Lawrence. You're dead to William's family now. They rode off in a fury of dust, but the hired gun looked back once, marking faces. The threat lingered after they'd gone. Morrison waited until they were specks on the horizon before speaking. They'll be back. Men like that don't give up easy when money's involved. Asher wrote, "Thank you. Don't thank me yet." Morrison pulled out the marriage certificate. This needs signatures to be legal proper, unless you two object to being actually married. Asher looked at Mara, this woman who'd brought danger to his door, who stood straight despite threats and accusations, who'd sung in the storm and held him while he grieved, who deserved peace more than anyone he'd known. She met his eyes, chin raised. "I have no objection." He took the pen Morrison offered, signed his name firm and clear, passed it to Mara, who hesitated only a moment before adding hers. Lucy and her father witnessed, making it real as words on paper could. "There." Morrison pocketed the document. "Legal as Sunday. Those Lawrence boys try anything now. They're interfering with a lawful marriage." After the Morrisons left with promises to watch for Crane in town, Asher and Mara stood alone in the yard. The wash still hung half done. His tools lay scattered on the barn roof. But the morning had shifted everything, left them married in law, if not ceremony. "I'm sorry," she started, but he pressed fingers to her lips. Gentle. Wrote on his board, "No secrets now." "No secrets." She caught his hand. "The insurance money is real, but I gave it to William's doctor. Every cent. He'd tried so hard to save him. It seemed right." He nodded. That sounded like her giving away what others would fight to keep. Wrote, "They'll come back." "I know." She looked toward the horizon where dust still lingered. "I bring trouble wherever I go." He cupped her face, made her meet his eyes, spoke aloud, forcing the words through his damaged throat, "My trouble now." She broke then, not in tears but in relief, sagging against him while the morning sun climbed higher. He held her in the dusty yard, his wife now in ways that mattered to law and men with papers. But they'd been building toward this longer, in small kindnesses and shared silence and songs in the storm. When she pulled back, her eyes were clear. "What do we do?" He wrote, "Be ready, together." That night he cleaned his rifle, checked ammunition. She organized papers, prepared for siege or flight. They worked in companionable silence, bound now by more than convenience or loneliness. Crane would return men like that always did, but they'd meet him together, two damaged souls who'd found strength in standing back to back against the world. The certificate lay on the table between them, ink already dry, names linked legal and proper. Outside, wind rattled the windows Asher had reinforced, but inside felt solid, protected by more than walls, protected by choice, by stubborn grace, by love that didn't need words to make it real. When they finally went to their separate beds, marriage certificate didn't change everything in a day. Asher paused at the ladder, tapped the wooden frame, caught her attention. "Thank you," he said aloud, rough but clear, "for staying." She smiled, first real smile he'd seen from her. "Thank you for standing between me and them." He climbed to his loft, lay wakeful in the dark. Below, he heard her moving quiet, probably checking windows, testing locks. His wife. The word felt strange and right, like a key finally finding its lock. Tomorrow Crane might return with more men, more threats. Tomorrow the town might whisper about hasty marriages and dangerous women. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. But tonight they were legal, bound by paper and witnesses and something deeper than law. Tonight she was Mara Pike, and he'd stand between her and any man who tried to drag her back to old graves. He touched the scar on his throat, remembering he'd failed to protect Martha, lost his voice crying warning too late, but Mara was here, alive, fierce in her quiet way, This time would be different. This time he'd be ready. The house settled into sleep around them. 2 heartbeats under one roof. No longer stranger and stranger, but husband and wife. Preparing for whatever storm tomorrow might bring. The shot cracked across the afternoon like a whip. Asher dropped behind the water trough, splinters exploding where his head had been. Second shot followed fast, punching through the barn wall. Mara screamed from the house. He couldn't see her, couldn't tell if she was hit. His rifle lay useless 10 feet away. Might as well have been 10 miles. "Pike," Crane's voice carried across the yard. "Let's discuss this civilized-like." Asher risked a glance. 4 men, same as before, but positioned smarter too by the corral. One behind the wagon. Crane himself sheltered by the old cottonwood stump. The hired gun had taken the first shots, measuring distance. Movement at the house, Mara's face in the window. Then gone, alive. Relief flooded through him even as another bullet sang overhead. "We're not here for you," Crane called. "Just want what's ours. Send her out. We ride away peaceful." Asher's chalk and board were in his pocket. Useless for this conversation. He measured angles, distances. The hammer still hung from his belt. But what good was it against rifles? Then Mara's voice, clear and strong from the house. "The money's gone. Samuel, I told you true." "Lying witch," Crane's composure cracked. "William wrote about that policy, said it would secure your future." He was fevered when he wrote that. Dying men say many things. Another shot, this one shattering the kitchen window. Asher heard her gasp, the crash of breaking glass. His hands clenched useless fists. The horses in the corral were screaming now, panicked by gunfire. The bay mare kicked at the rails, eyes rolling white. If she broke through... That's when he saw it, Lucy Morrison's buggy coming fast down the east road. But no, the dust cloud was all wrong. Too many horses, too fast. "Riders coming," one of Crane's men shouted. Everyone turned to look. A dozen men at least, riding hard from town. Judge Morrison in the lead. Lucy driving a wagon behind with what looked like half of Dry Willow's population. "Gentlemen," Morrison's voice boomed across the distance. "Having a disagreement." Crane swore vicious. The hired gun kept his rifle trained on Asher's position, but uncertainty crept into his stance. They'd expected an isolated ranch, 2 easy targets, not a citizens' brigade. The townsmen spread out as they arrived, forming a loose circle. Asher recognized faces Tom Morrison from the livery, the banker Fitzgerald, even Hampton from the general store. Men who'd never spoken to him, come to stand between him and bullets. "This is private business," Crane snarled. "Shooting up our neighbor seems pretty public," Morrison replied mild. "Boys, what say we escort these gentlemen to town, let them explain their grievances proper-like? You have no authority." "Got about 12 authorities right here." Morrison patted his rifle. "Colorado Justice, Mr. Crane." The standoff stretched taut. Then a child's cry split the air high. Terrified, everyone spun toward the sound. Little Ben Harper, the minister's boy, had wandered from the wagon. Maybe 4 years old, curious as a cat, now frozen between the armed groups. His mother screamed from the wagon bed. The bay mare chose that moment to break free. Months of storm trauma. Gunfire too close, she burst through the corral rails like judgment, hooves thunder on packed earth, heading straight for the boy. Everything slowed to honey. The child standing stupid with fear. The horse bearing down. 1,000 pounds of panic. Men shouting, too far to help. Mara flew from the house, black dress streaming. She sprint toward the boy. But the angle was wrong. The horse too fast. She'd never make it. Asher didn't think. Launched himself from behind the trough, legs pumping. The hired gun swung his rifle. Tracking movement. The shot buzzed past Asher's ear like an angry bee. 10 feet from the boy, the horse looming huge, hooves high. Mara screaming something lost in the chaos. Asher dove, caught the child around the middle, rolled hard. Hooves struck where they'd been. So close he felt wind from their passing. His shoulder hit wrong. Something tearing inside. White-hot pain shot down his side. The horse thundered past, kept running toward open prairie. The boy wailed but seemed whole. Asher tried to stand, couldn't, warmth spreading under his shirt. "No!" Mara was there, hands on his face, his chest. They came away red. "No, no, no!" The hired gun's bullet had found its mark after all. Not center mass, but enough. Asher tried to speak, managed only a wet cough. The crowd erupted. Morrison's men closed on Crane's group. Weapons raised. "Drop them now!" Crane was screaming about rights, about property, but his men saw the writing clear. Guns clattered to earth. The hired gun looked almost disappointed as he raised his hands. "Get the doctor!" someone shouted. "Fast!" Mara pressed her hands to the wound, trying to stem the flow. Her face swam in and out of focus. Beautiful. He thought stupid, even terrified. She was beautiful. "Don't you dare!" she whispered, fierce. "Don't you dare leave me too!" He wanted to tell her it was different. He wasn't her cursed husband's, dying young of accidents and fever. This was a choice, a trade his life for the boys. Martha would have understood. More hands now, lifting him. The minister's wife sobbing thanks. Men cursing steady as they carried him to the wagon. Sky wheeling overhead. Too bright. "Stay with me," Mara commanded. "Asher Pike, you stay." He tried, focused on her face, her hands gripping his, but darkness crept in from the edges, familiar as an old coat. He'd been here before, when the raiders cut his throat. Only this time Martha wasn't calling his name. Instead, Mara was singing. Soft, desperate, the hymn from the storm. "There is a balm in Gilead." He wanted to tell her yes. Yes, there was healing in her voice. Yes, she'd already made him whole in ways that mattered. Yes, he'd do it again. Dive between death and innocence. His hand found hers, squeezed once. Then the singing faded. The sky went dark, and Asher Pike fell into silence deeper than any he'd known. Made the wounded whole. Mara finished, tears streaming. The wagon bounced hard, racing for town and the doctor. Blood soaked through her pressed hands, marked her widow's dress with fresh grief. Behind them, Morrison's men had Crane's group surrounded, were marching them to town at gunpoint. Justice would be done. Order restored. But none of that mattered if the man in her arms died for a stranger's child. "You saved him," Ben Harper's mother kept saying. "You saved my boy." Mara wanted to scream that she didn't care, that she'd trade a dozen strangers for this one quiet man who'd stood between her and harm, who'd washed her shawl and built her shelter and signed his name next to hers without hesitation. "Almost there," Tom Morrison called from the driver's seat. "Doc's ready." She looked down at Asher's still face. The scar on his throat stood out pale against sun-dark skin. He'd lost his voice trying to save Martha. Now he'd lost blood trying to save Ben, always paying for his good heart with pieces of himself. "Listen to me," she said fierce in his ear. "I know you think I'm cursed, think I bring death to men who care for me, but you're wrong. You're nothing like them. You're too stubborn to die, too careful to leave things unfinished, and we're not finished. You and I." The wagon lurched to a stop. Hands reached to lift him, carry him into the doctor's house. She followed close, gripping his hand, still singing when words failed. The hymn became a thread between them, holding him to the world of sound and light, and her voice saying, "Stay, stay, stay." Morrison appeared at her elbow as the doctor worked. "Crane's locked up, his men too. They'll answer for this." She nodded, not caring. What was justice against the possibility of one more grave? One more good man lost to violence in her proximity. "He's strong," Morrison said gentle. "Seen him survive worse." But they both knew that was only partly true. The body could survive what the spirit couldn't, and if Asher woke to find himself saved at a child's expense, would he count it worth the cost? Mrs. Pike. The doctor, sleeves bloody, face grim but not hopeless. I've got the bullet out, missed the vital parts, but he's lost blood. Next hours will tell. She sat by the bed they'd laid him on, took up his hand again. His fingers lay limp in hers, but warm, still warm. I'll stay, she said. Course you will. The doctor squeezed her shoulder. Talk to him. Sometimes they hear more than we know. So she talked, told him about the sunflowers blooming by the porch, how the new calf had his coloring, brown and white, that she'd found his cache of peppermint sticks hidden in the barn and only stole 2. Promises of ordinary life, anchors to pull him back. When words ran out, she sang every hymn her mother taught her, every trail song from the freight camps, even silly ditties remembered from childhood. Her throat went raw, but she didn't stop. If her voice was the thread between them, she'd spin it strong as cable. Night fell. Oil lamps cast shadows on the walls. Outside, she heard the town settling after the day's violence. Crane and his men awaiting the circuit judge. The Harper boy safe in his own bed. The world spinning on as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. She'd found a place, a purpose, a partner who saw past her black dress to the woman underneath, who'd given her silence when she needed it, songs when she was ready, who'd stand between her and any harm without hesitation or regret. Please, she whispered when her voice finally broke. I know I'm selfish to ask, but please don't leave. I've been so long alone, and you make the loneliness bearable. You make me remember who I was before grief. Please. His hand moved in hers. Just a twitch, maybe nothing, but then his fingers curved, seeking hers. His eyes stayed closed, but his throat worked, trying for words that wouldn't come. She leaned close, ear near his lips, heard it faint as moth wings, not leaving. Promise! The word came out cracked, desperate. His hand squeezed, not strong, but sure, a promise made in flesh and will, stronger than any words. She sang again then, soft as lullabies, sang him through the dark hours while his chest rose and fell, while the wound seeped slow through bandages, while the doctor came and went with worried eyes. Sang until dawn broke clean through the windows, and Asher Pike opened his eyes to find her there, voice nearly gone but still spinning the thread that bound them. He couldn't speak, throat too dry, body too weak, but his eyes said everything. Thank you, stay, home. Always, she croaked, and knew she meant it. Whatever came next, recovery or relapse, gossip or acceptance, they'd face it together. The twice-widowed woman and the mute rancher, building something worth saving from the pieces of their broken lives. Outside, Dry Willow woke to a new day, but inside the doctor's house, Mara Pike kept singing, soft and sure, calling her husband back from the edge of silence with the only voice that mattered, the one that chose to stay. 3 weeks of healing passed slow as molasses. Asher mended the way he did everything steady, stubborn, without complaint. The doctors said the lung had been grazed, but not punctured. Counted it miracle enough. Mara knew better. Knew it was will more than luck that kept him breathing through those first dark nights. She brought him home when he could sit upright without going gray. The ranch had suffered in their absence. Lucy Morrison and her father had kept the animals fed, but small things had slipped. Weeds in her garden, dust on the shelves, that particular emptiness of a house without its people. Asher tried to work the first day back. She found him collapsed by the corral, sweat-soaked and shaking. Let him back inside without scolding, but hid his boots that night. He wrote cranky messages on his board, but she ignored them with the practice of a woman who'd nursed stubborn men before. The difference was, this time she wanted him to heal, not from duty or obligation, but from something deeper that had taken root during those long nights of singing. Something that made her heart catch when he smiled, made her hands gentle when changing his bandages. The town had shifted too. News of Asher diving to save the Harper boy spread like wildfire. Suddenly, the mute rancher wasn't just that hermit Pike, but a hero. And Mara wasn't the Black Widow anymore, but the woman who'd sung her husband back from death's door. Mrs. Hampton actually smiled when they finally made it back to the store. That blue chambray worked up nice. Haven't had time yet, Mara admitted. Soon, though. No rush. Man saves a child. He deserves new shirts whenever they come. She leaned closer. Conspiratorial. Heard you sang for 3 days straight. That true? He needed something to follow back. The older woman's eyes went soft. My Bill got lost in his own head after the war. Took me singing every night for a year before he found his way home proper. Sometimes a voice is all that stands between a man and the dark. Small kindnesses bloomed everywhere. Fresh bread left on their porch. Tom Morrison refusing payment for feed. Even Mrs. Carver, queen of gossips, brought a pie and stammered something about misjudging. But it was the evening Asher started carving that things truly changed. Mara was mending his shirts finally. From that good blue cloth when she noticed him working a piece of pine. His hands moved sure despite the healing wound, knife peeling away curls of gold wood. What are you making? He held it up, a small bird, wings half spread, pointed to her, then to his throat. A songbird. He nodded, kept carving. Over the next days, more appeared. A horse for courage, a sun for hope, a tiny house that fit in her palm. He lined them on the mantel, a wordless story of what they'd built. One evening, catching her admiring them, he wrote, "For our children." The words hung between them huge as mountains. They still kept separate beds, marriage more legal than physical. But the promise in those wooden toys made her heart race. "Children need a father who can speak," she said, careful. He touched his throat, then wrote, "Have you—" The simplicity of it broke her open. Yes, she could be voice for both of them. Yes, children could grow up understanding love came in many languages. Yes, they could build a family from the pieces of their separate griefs. That night she found him on the porch, watching stars wheel overhead. Sat beside him, close enough their shoulders touched. "I need to tell you something," she said, "about the insurance money." He waited, patient as always. "I lied, not about giving it away, but about why." She took a breath. "The doctor didn't want it, said it wouldn't bring William back, but I insisted. Made him take every cent." Her voice dropped. "I couldn't bear to profit from another death. Couldn't stand the thought of building anything on that foundation." His hand found hers in the darkness. "But now—" She turned to face him. "Now I think maybe I was wrong. Maybe the money wasn't cursed. Maybe it was just money, and I could have used it for good, could have helped us here, made things easier." He squeezed her hand, reached for his board with the other. The chalk glowed pale in moonlight. "Built this without blood money. Built it on work and trust. Better foundation. Samuel and William would have wanted—" He stopped her with fingers gentle on her lips. Wrote, "They're gone. We're here. Forward, not back." She understood then what he was offering. Not forgetting never that, but permission to stop carrying the dead like stones in her pockets. Permission to live for the living, to build joy on ground that had known sorrow. "Teach me," she said sudden. He tilted his head, questioning. "Your language, the signs the railroad workers use, teach me to speak with my hands." He smiled then, bright as sunrise, set down the board and positioned her fingers, showing the first simple signs. "Hello? Thank you. Home." They practiced until full dark, hands dancing in the lamplight from inside. She was clumsy, uncertain, but he was patient. Showed her again and again until the movements began to feel natural. When they finally went inside, she paused at the ladder to his loft. "Asher." He turned, eyebrows raised. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore." The words fell between them like stones in still water. He went very still, searching her face. She met his gaze steady. Sure. He came to her slow, careful of his healing side, cupped her face in work-rough hands, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. She could see the question in his eyes. Was she certain? Was this what she wanted? For answer, she rose on her toes and kissed him, soft, careful of all the fragile things between them. He made a sound, surprise or joy or both, and pulled her closer. When they broke apart, he was smiling, took her hand, led her not to his loft but to the room that had been Martha's, then hers, now theirs. The bed seemed huge and full of possibility. They came together gentle, mindful of his wound and her long grief. Found ways to speak without words, touch and breath, and the quiet sounds of two people choosing each other. Outside, wind sang through the cottonwood leaves. Inside, they made their own music. Later, curved together like paired spoons, Mara traced letters on his chest, Home. He caught her hand, kissed each finger, then spoke aloud, voice rough but determined, Mara. Her name in his broken voice was the sweetest sound she'd ever heard. Yes, my wife. Yes, she agreed, and felt him smile against her hair. They dozed and woke and loved again, making up for lost time and lonely years. When dawn came pink through the windows, they were different people. Not healed, some wounds never fully mended, but whole in the ways that mattered. Asher made breakfast while she fed the chickens. She sang while he worked the horses. They met for noon dinner and touched hands across the table, marveling at the ordinariness of it. How extraordinary it was to choose happiness after so much sorrow. That evening, sitting on the porch steps, watching the sun paint the mountains gold, Asher pulled out a new piece of wood, carved while she watched, curious. When he finished, he handed her a wooden heart, small enough to wear on a cord. Inside, he'd carved one word, yours. She pressed it to her chest, felt tears prick her eyes. Always. Always, he managed aloud. And she knew he'd been practicing while she wasn't listening, working to give her words as she'd given him songs. They sat together while stars emerged one by one, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist. The ranch spread peaceful around them, garden growing, animals settled, house standing strong against whatever weather might come. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The wound still pulled when he moved wrong. The town gossips would find new fodder. There'd be drought and storms and all the hardships of ranch life. But tonight they had this each other, a porch to sit on, stars to witness their quiet joy. Mara hummed soft, a new melody without words. Asher carved by feel, hands sure in the darkness, two voices learning to blend, one in wood and silence, one in song and speech. The twice-widowed woman and the mute rancher, writing a love story in the margins of their loss, building something worth saving from the scattered pieces of before, finding that sometimes the best foundations were laid not in perfection but in the choice to stay, to try, to sing each other home through whatever darkness fell. In the house behind them, wooden toys waited on the mantel, promises of laughter to come. And in the heart of Colorado territory, on a small ranch called Dry Willow, two souls who'd thought themselves too damaged for love discovered that broken voices could still make music, if they were brave enough to try. The stars wheeled on, indifferent and eternal, but below them, Asher Pike and his wife Mara sat in perfect contentment, proof that even in the harshest ground, love could take root and bloom. All it needed was patience, kindness, and the courage to keep singing when the words ran out. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts on Asher and Mara's journey. If you enjoyed this tale from the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more listeners discover these stories of love, loss, and redemption on the frontier. Your support means the world and helps keep these stories alive. Until next time, partners.